Hi, everybody. Welcome. My name is Paul Golan. I'm Executive Director of the Society for Humanistic Judaism, and thank you for joining this first episode of Life, the Universe, and Humanistic Judaism. It's a rabbis series, rabbi and cantor series, clergy series from humanistic Jewish clergy for members of the Society for Humanistic Judaism. So I just want to take a minute or two to, first of all, thank you for being a member of the Society for Humanistic Judaism. I want to explain what that is because you may know, but you may not know. So I'm not going to presume that you do. We have a couple of different ways of being a member of the Society for Humanistic Judaism. If you are a member of one of our local affiliated communities, then you're also a member of the Society for Humanistic Judaism. We have a list of our affiliated communities at www.shj.org/find. And that may be how many of you come here, and we thank you. There are things that we can do as a movement on a local level in community with one another that simply can't be replicated online. And we very much believe in the value of in-person community. So we're lucky to be able to have a movement of 28 affiliated communities in the US and Canada. We also, though, have a membership directly to SHJ that we call an independent members program. And some of you may be joining us through that kind of membership. And that allows us to serve people who may not be able to join a local affiliate for a variety of reasons, most often because you don't live anywhere near a local affiliated community. And as we can see from our initial chat, we've got folks joining us from other countries in North America and Europe. So I don't know if we have anyone yet from Asia, but we have members in Asia as well. So we're thrilled to be able to offer that kind of affiliation with our movement. And we are so appreciative for your support. Membership to me is more than just a set of benefits that we try to provide for you, even though, of course, we are trying to provide content and meeting on a regular basis. But for me, it's also you supporting the work of humanistic Judaism to reach and provide meaning to other people. So we think a lot about, for example, the PBS model. Those of you who are not in the US may not know what PBS is, the Public Broadcast System Service. And you probably know Sesame Street, which is a product of theirs, which has gone global. But basically, this is a TV channel in the US that is free for anyone who gets broadcast television, but they are membership driven and they make appeals to ask for member support. And some people will provide that support, and then they will give those members some benefits. But I don't think anyone is becoming a member of PBS because they really want to pay $250 for the DVD version of the show that they just watched. It's like a nice bonus, but that's not why I think most people are donating to PBS. They're donating because they want that voice to be available for themselves and for others. And I think that is the same for humanistic Judaism. And we are able to be a voice for a secular and humanistic Jewish approach that is unique and that relies on your membership and support. So kind of think of this webinar series as your PBS tote bag. And again, thank you so much for allowing us to kind of do the work that we do. We'd love to bring on more members if possible. If you want to help spread the word, we've grown in membership as a movement to about where we were, a little bit more than where we were on the eve of the COVID-19 pandemic. So we have kind of come back as far as membership levels. We'd love to continue to increase that if you feel comfortable sharing the word with folks who might want to become a member of SHJ. And what better way for us to kick off a series, a members exclusive benefit series for our existing members and potential new members with Rabbi Miriam Jerris, who has been there not just since the beginning of humanistic Judaism, but before the beginning of humanistic Judaism. She's my esteemed colleague at the Society for Humanistic Judaism and has been a member of SHJ and the Congregation for Humanistic Judaism of Metro Detroit, formerly the Birmingham Temple, and has been committed to its philosophic principles since 1970. As the rabbi of SHJ, she provides philosophic, liturgical, ceremonial, and organizational support for its affiliates and members. Rabbi Jerris is the co-editor of the liturgical book, Here is Our Light. She is the 2006 recipient of the Sherwin T. Wine Lifetime Achievement Award. She's a former president of the Association of Humanistic Rabbis, the Rabbinic Association for Humanistic Rabbis. Rabbi Jerris holds a PhD in Jewish Studies with a specialization in pastoral counseling from Union Institute and University in Cincinnati, Ohio, a master's degree in Near Eastern Studies from the University of Michigan, Go Blue, and a master's degree in Humanistic and Clinical Psychology from the Michigan School of Professional Psychology. She was ordained by the International Institute for Secular Humanistic Judaism in 2001 and is their associate professor for professional development, serving as a mentor for its students. Rabbi Jerris specializes in serving multicultural families and couples and has officiated at intermarriage ceremonies since 1985. Miriam, welcome.
Thank you. I'm going to leave now because I'm exhausted just hearing
Me too.
what I do. I was teasing Paul earlier and I said, okay, 60 years of humanistic Judaism in 20 minutes. Here we go. I wanted to start with the story. Every organization, religion, relationship, individual has an origin story. And I'm going to read from Atheism for Dummies. Oh, you can't see that because I've got a background. Atheism for Dummies. And read what they say about the humanistic Judaism origin story. Imagine a clergy member informing the congregation that he or she no longer believes in God. That declaration has to be one of the most dramatic human moments imaginable. This person, the one who has led many of them to faith or reinforced it when it was flagging, who quoted chapter and verse in times of need or loss, who may even have preached against unbelief, this person of all people is an atheist. Given the shock, anger, and betrayal many would naturally feel in this situation, you can easily see why the 18th century priest, Jean Meslier, waited until he was dead, and 20th century minister Dan Barker sent a letter. But in 1963, Rabbi Sherwin Wine actually walked to the front of his synagogue in Windsor, Ontario, faced a congregation expecting a typical Saturday service, and told them that he no longer believed in God, but that he still considered himself a Jew. As he stood in front of the murmuring crowd, he obviously knew people would be shocked. But I'm sure he also knew that he couldn't possibly be the only one in the room who felt as he did. So after he announced that he'd be stepping down, he invited anyone else who happened to feel the same to come and to create. Well, whatever would be next. He didn't really know what that would be. 8 families came forward to help figure out what's next. They ended up forming a whole new kind of Jewish congregation, a non-theistic one, right across the river in Detroit, the Birmingham Temple. Wine created a new humanistic liturgy that reflected Jewish culture, identity, and history, and taught humanist ethics without reference to God. Well, this is a great story. It reminds me a little bit of the story of Moses and the people of the Jewish people at Mount Sinai. And I'll tell you why. The reason is because, yes, Sherwin Wine was the rabbi at Temple Bethel in Windsor, Ontario. It was my temple. But we never, ever had a Saturday morning service. So he couldn't come out in front of us all on Saturday morning. And yes, 8 families did start something new, but none of them were from Windsor, Ontario. And I had, one of the things I did before this program is I researched finally who the 8 families were. I don't know why it wasn't written down anywhere, but I've got them all. And I have to disappoint about 150 other families who think they were part of those first 8 families, but that's reality. What really happened was that he got a call from members of Temple Bethel in Detroit, which he was the rabbi there before going to Windsor. And he got a call from a couple of young couples, because he was in charge of the young couples program at Temple Bethel in Detroit. And they said, we want a suburban Detroit Reform temple. And that's exactly what they started, a suburban Reform temple. So now that we have a sense of how it really began and how it really didn't begin, oh, and by the way, he never stood in front of any congregation and said he was an atheist. That never happened. So let's see, where can I start? So I mentioned that I was a member of his congregation. I was 11 years old when he came to our congregation. Windsor, Ontario was very conservative. We had 2 Orthodox congregations, but no conservative and no Reform. So we were the first Reform congregation, and it was young families and all the exciting things that happened in the very early 60s in Reform Judaism. The call he got was in, I believe it was August or July or August of 63. He met with a group of, I think, maybe 16 couples. And in November of 1963, it was actually 8 men, but 8 couples signed a declaration that they were founders of this new entity. And he was still at the congregation in Windsor. So the first services of the Birmingham Temple were Sunday nights. And in June of 1964, he left the Windsor congregation after he bat mitzvahed and confirmed me. And so it began. And it did begin like other Reform congregations, sort of, because from the very beginning, Sherwin knew what he wanted. He knew what he had in mind. And although he didn't declare it from the pulpit, he knew philosophically where he stood. And slowly, but not as slowly as you might think, he introduced new liturgy. He created this ritual committee, and he was the chair of the ritual committee. But everything was up for question. And that was, I mean, it's appealing at any point in history, but in the early 1960s, knowing that you could question everything, because orthodoxy, although it maintains that you can't in the same way that he was suggesting that you could. So very excited group of people, but within 9 months, the Shema was gone, the Kaddish was gone, and he was writing new reflections and creating new music that defined what Humanistic Judaism became. So that was the beginning. 1963, this weekend, CHJ in Detroit, the original Birmingham Temple, is celebrating its 60th anniversary. So this is a good time for this to happen. In 1965, in January of 1965, Time magazine wrote an article. It was not on the cover. That's another myth. Not on the cover, but an article that you can get on the internet. If you say Sherwin Wine, Time magazine, 1965, it pops right up, and it tells his story that indeed he was an atheist, but he really saw himself as an agnostic, which meant that he believes something when he has evidence for it. And as long as there's no evidence, then you move on as if whatever it is doesn't exist. And that got the word out a bit. And within a couple of years, he received a call from Rabbi Daniel Friedman, who is a Reform rabbi in Illinois. And Daniel Friedman had already started something that he called rational Judaism. But he was hearing about this Sherwin Wine guy and realized that they were doing the same thing. So in, let's see, in July of 1967, and if anybody knows the history of race relations, that was exactly when the Detroit riots started. And they're driving into Detroit, he and his wife, to meet Sherwin, and there's tanks on the road. And so we began with a revolution. Not sure it was our revolution, but there it was. And he and Dan decided that they would start collaborating. In the meantime, a member of the temple moved to Connecticut, Jean and John Franklin, and they started CHJ in Connecticut. And that's a lot of our communities started because somebody moved one to the other, and I can mention a few along the way. And in the late 60s, they had a conference. And there was a Reform rabbi who was working with CHJ Connecticut at the time, and Dan Friedman and Sherwin Wine, and they brought people together to discuss what this was all about. And it was the beginning of collaboration. Now, in 1967, until November of 67 until August of 68, there was a newspaper strike in Detroit. And right around November of 67, somebody had interviewed Rabbi Wine about Humanistic Judaism. And it wasn't published until August. And there it was, the atheist rabbi. That's where that one came from. And then Birmingham Temple became flooded with people from all over the world who wanted to know more about what this was all about. And we started a committee at the temple. I say we, I wasn't there yet. They started a committee of people who would answer letters. That, by the way, became my job, and made connections. And Sherwin, who loved nothing more than to get up and speak in front of anybody who would listen to him, started to travel, and these communities started popping up slowly. Sherwin was an incredibly unusual person. And for those of you who knew him, know that, and those who never had the opportunity to meet him, it's very hard to describe. His intellect was razor sharp. The man had more information and a photographic memory. I remember being in classes with him, and he's talking about Arab Emirates and naming one after another, and everybody's writing them down. Somebody said to me, "Why aren't you writing them down?" I said, "Are you kidding? I'll never remember these, but I know where to find them," which became my personal attitude about Sherwin Wine and his intellect, is that I could never equal it, but I could always know where to find the information that he imparted. The other thing about Sherwin was he was so kind, and he so wanted other people to succeed as long as they didn't take his position. But he encouraged those of us, and there's a few of us that I can see that are on today, who wanted to become leaders. He encouraged us from the very beginning to the very end. He especially encouraged women to do it. That is a probably talk for my master's in psychology, but not for now. In the mid-70s, a community started in Boston. So the people from KB should know that they were numero 4 in the Society for Humanistic Judaism. And then shortly after that, I actually went with Sherwin at this point to Washington, D.C. And we started a community there from a couple who had left Detroit, and a few couples actually who had left Detroit and ended up in Washington. And they started a congregation called Beth Chai, which Machar, the current one, finally left over philosophical conflicts, and we have them everywhere. And that was the beginning of that. What else can I tell you about Sherwin?
Well, can I ask you
yes.
to just fill in a couple of the things that you were mentioning. So first of all, he was your rabbi when you got bat mitzvahed, and that was in Windsor, Ontario, Canada. And he wasn't the only rabbi. He was like the associate rabbi, right? Was he the only rabbi of that congregation? Okay.
Which was one of the things that appealed to him.
Right.
Because he was the assistant.
And
yeah,
then,
we were small at that point.
And then when he went over to Birmingham Temple, obviously there was a gap, but what brought you back to be a part of the community there?
The community. Okay. So there was a slight gap.
By the way, your bat mitzvah was a traditional theistic, like he wasn't doing humanistic Judaism at all there yet. Okay.
6th book of Numbers. The threefold benediction. Some of us never forget. But on a personal note, my bat mitzvah was a defining moment for me personally. My Orthodox grandfather, I don't know, he decided that he would get in a car on Friday night and come see his granddaughter bat mitzvah. And he came up to me afterwards and in his broken English said, "They say women shouldn't read from the Torah, but if they read as well as you did, I don't know why." And, there's nothing like having that ancestral approval. And I went, yeah, this really was as cool as I thought it was. And that was the beginning of my desire to be in the rabbinate. My other funny story about the rabbinate is that I was graduating in 1969 from college. So I wrote to Hebrew Union College and asked them to send me an application for their rabbinic program. And they wrote back and said, we don't have women rabbis. And I went, what? What do you mean you don't have women rabbis? And it was 2 years later when they moved Sally Prizan from the doctoral program into the rabbinic program and ordained her. But I was a naive young woman who believed that she could go after her goals. And I was surprised to learn that not so fast.
Yeah. But then at what point did you reconnect with him?
So we reconnected. I married my sort of high school sweetheart, and our parents were best friends. My first husband, Bruce Jerris, and we moved to Detroit. That's when, and 2 years later, my brother was killed in a car train accident. And there was a new rabbi in Windsor, and I was very vocal about having Sherwin involved. I said, he's the one who knew us. He's the one who was there when they helped my brother through his bar mitzvah, and he had special needs. So it was a very unique experience. And so that's when I always knew he was there, but that's when we reconnected. And he died in August. So my husband and I started going to services right away, high holiday services, and we joined almost immediately. I honestly didn't know what humanistic Judaism was. I knew that what they were doing, I liked, but I didn't even know what humanism was. How did I get through college? And I took one philosophy class, but never understood what humanism was. And Sherwin's gift was the ability to take extraordinarily complex ideas and lay them out for you so that they were understandable, clear, and that was his gift as a teacher and as a speaker. was that, the complexity just kind of unfolded in front of you and became this kind of clear statement. So
And when you talked about Dan Friedman coming together and also with CHJ in Fairfield County, Connecticut,
yeah,
those were the three communities that formed Society for Humanistic
in
Judaism.
1969.
69, right. And then he added the institute, the International Institute for Secular Humanistic Judaism in 1985. Am I getting that date correct?
Well, so things started happening in the early 80s. Sherwin always knew that what would engage people and excite people were new projects. And BJ, I happen to be able to see you at the top of my screen. I could see you smiling because Sherwin loved projects and got us all excited about any new project, which were, I mean, it was like a printing press. They'd come off the press one after another after another. So the first thing he did was in 1980, the Society for Humanistic Judaism had an annual conference in May, and he invited the member of Knesset, Shulamit Aloni from Israel, to be our speaker. And she came, spent the weekend with us. She was our scholar in residence. It was amazing. We made this fabulous connection. And then the following year, we went to Israel as a small group of people. I don't even remember how many people there were at that point, but he took a small group of people. We had a conference at a kibbutz, and because Israel is so small, everybody heard about us in Israel. So Yehuda Bauer found out about us at that time. The people from the Mapam kibbutz found out about us at that time. And it started getting together the international focus. That's what all of that started. And for the first few years, we were going to Israel almost every 2 years. In 1982, we had a donor who spent advertising dollars for the society. And there were advertisements in the New York Times, in the Jerusalem Post, and other places. And a professor from Israel found out about us, came to our 1982 conference in Florida, and that solidified the connection and started the International Federation, which was before the Institute. So, and the first big launch of the Federation was 1986. We had a conference here in Detroit. There were 300 people there, and people from all over the world. And that was this like solidifying of this international movement. And we became known all over. And in intellectual circles, because especially in Israel, when you have Yehuda Bauer on your team, and the former Supreme Court Justice Chaim Cohen was part of our group, I mean, it was really exciting. And when Zev Katz, who was the professor who joined us in Florida, when we went there, he took us into the Knesset and, watched a Knesset session. It was amazing, to have these incredible connections. In the meantime, the word passed around, and people moved. And in the 80s, there was another woman from San Diego who was very committed to this idea. She became one of our first leaders. And she and I met in San Francisco and drove down the coast to San Diego and created like 4 or 5 different communities. And that was so fun. And then, then we'd send Sherwin out to, give the hot talk as we did all the organizational work and establish that kind of connection, which was great. But a lot of the communities have morphed, but I saw Alana is here, and it was the San Francisco Society for Humanistic Judaism, which became Kol Hadash in the Bay Area. And then we did start. I'm already in the north, Sheila. I got to get down. I got to get down to you. And then we did some work in Santa Barbara and LA, and in Laguna Hills at Leisure World. And Sheila is shaking her head yes. And we started a group there that was extraordinarily active for many, many years. And thanks to Sheila for, being one of the powerful forces in that community. So, we had all these burgeoning little communities. Sherwin would go out and do talks, and we'd have conferences, and we did have an annual conference at that time. And people came together. I mean, wherever we had a conference, people would show up. And at least in the 80s, that was really a very exciting time.
I never met him, and I know that a lot of certainly our newer members never met him. Still, I think even today there is a resonance of what he did, because a lot of our leaders, even today, were initially inspired by him. But even folks who are coming in now, many of them are discovering us through his writing or his books.
Mm-hmm.
And, and I've heard, even though I've never met him, the impact that he had when I have visited our local affiliates, and like the founders would say, yeah, I went to hear Sherwin speak, and we got to talking, and then he told me I was going to start this community. And they're like the just remarkable surprise, even as they're explaining it a decade or two later, and I was like, oh, I am. And then they did.
Exactly.
But I think that, I don't know whether it was the case, talk about the 80s, and look, we were founded as a congregational denomination because
Right.
he was doing it along the lines of Reform Judaism. He was ordained as a Reform rabbi. It's the structures he knew that we were emulating. And in the 80s, those structures were still working. And then a lot of factors came into play that made those structures really challenging. And it becomes more challenging when it's a volunteer only community, right? And it becomes more challenging when it's a community that's trying to reach the exact profile of people who don't join, or don't even necessarily know that you could have the benefits of religious community without religion, or the benefits of Jewish ritual without religion. Was that becoming noticeable? Was that addressed at all, or was it, because he was killed in a car accident tragically? He was not young, but it was a shock to everyone who knew him, and that was 2007. So you did have the aughts, or the late 90s. Was there a sense that the models are challenged, the all volunteer communities have specific challenges?
Yeah, absolutely. And we even began to see that, Sherwin would go back to a major community, and he was at one time bringing in hundreds of people, and 50 were showing up. Mm-hmm. So, it was clearly changing. Although one of the things that differentiates us from any of the other liberal movements in Judaism is that from the beginning, rabbis took these small congregations. And although I did research some years back and discovered that in terms of when our rabbinic seminary opened, we were ahead of when Reform first ordained members, when Recon first ordained, Reconstructionist movement first ordained members, and before Renewal got their program together. We were ahead of all that, but it didn't have the same numbers. And
you mean ordain officiants?
No, I mean rabbis. I'm talking about rabbis right
You
now.
were ahead of what?
We were ahead of all those other movements in starting our rabbinic program. But that was the end of it. We never got the numbers.
Starting a rabbinic program for what? I'm sorry.
Okay, so the Reform movement took X number of years before they started their rabbinic seminary. It took us less time from our founding. That's what I mean.
Once you decided to start a seminary.
Yes. And of course, you're right. We decided to do leadership first. We were dealing with a coalition between people from Reform backgrounds and secular Jews. And, you know, the people from the secular Jewish world cringed when you said the word rabbi, and you know, you could see it in their faces as they were listening to Sherwin saying the things they believed, but out of the mouth of a rabbi, which never quite worked. So there was resistance to the rabbinic model. And I mean, I think one of the things that kept us thriving for as long as we have is that we trained a lot of leaders in those early days. And, you know, there's a backlog of those of us who were extremely active, and we all took the leadership program. And after, you know, many of us took the leadership program, Sherwin then said, once we had a rabbinic program, then said, okay, you're going to be a rabbi. You know, Jeffrey Chesnell talked about that at his ordination, you know, that Sherwin said, okay, now you're going to be a rabbi. And I mean, I always wanted to be, so it wasn't, you know, a surprise for me. It was like, oh, thank goodness. But we started in 1992, and because people ask me numbers all the time, I counted. We have 21 rabbis. We've ordained 17 to date, 18 to date, and one rabbi has left our movement, and then one is deceased.
And just because it came up in the chat, just to clarify, what we're talking about now is the International Institute for Secular Humanistic Judaism, which is SHJ's sister organization. You know, it's its own nonprofit organization, because as Miriam already said, you know, Sherwin liked to start new and exciting organizations. And they are our educational arm. So they ordain rabbis, but also they have a new officiant program, which is much shorter term, and they have a leadership program that's kind of in the middle of those, that we call madrichim, right? Leaders, teachers, and many of those get that training and then use it to start humanistic Jewish communities in their areas.
Right.
And what's interesting to me when I came into this was how rigorous, I argue too rigorous, our program is, because, you know, nowadays you could become a rabbi in 6 months online at this certifying place. Like, people aren't necessarily asking for where you got ordained, and yet the timeline for becoming a rabbi in our movement is not any different than becoming a reform and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, that was done for legitimacy reasons, because we wanted to be accepted by the other denominations. I don't know if that's quite worked out that way yet or not. It seems, though. You know, what do you think about how it's
well, you know, I think so. I originally, when we started the rabbinic program with the International Institute, which was like 1992, a PhD was required in Jewish studies. And then a few people said, really, Sherwin? You know? So, but you still have to have a master's in Jewish studies, Jewish history, because the institute itself, the rabbinic seminary, and our officiant and leader training institution is not, I'm going to forget the word now again, accredited. Oh, I got it. Not accredited. Right. And so we felt that we needed that traditional kind of thing. But I'll tell you, when I first went to the Michigan Board of Rabbis, they asked me how much Talmud I had. Like, that was their big thing. And I can count, now I've been a rabbi since 2019. I can count on this hand the number of times somebody has asked me a serious Talmudic question. And as I said before, I know how to find it.
Right.
You know,
You were ordained what year? What year were you ordained?
2020, yeah,
19.
21 years ago, 22 years
Right.
ago. Do the math. I can
2001. 2001?
2001. That's what
Okay.
it was.
Yeah. Yeah.
I said 19 because it was October 19th.
Right. And as Marlene is pointing out in the chat, many of our communities are run by trained leaders but don't have rabbis. Many of our communities are run by untrained leaders, right, who just wanted a humanistic Jewish community. And I think that we have a remarkable diversity of types of communities. We're very flexible about people being able to get together. Some of our communities look more like clubs. Others look like full-fledged suburban congregational synagogues. So there is a wide variety. And I like that there is that flexibility. And certainly there's a lot of autonomy on the local level too. We're not top down. We don't dictate. We don't tell anyone how to do it. We just want to provide resources and kind of variety. So it's interesting to hear about all of the background of it. I want to make sure we open it up to folks to ask questions of Miriam if you have any, either in the chat or if you know how to put your hand up virtually using the button. I don't even see that button. So maybe just.
It's under more, I think.
I'm not seeing it. Can someone put their hand up just to show me that you could put your hand up? Ah, there you go. A lot of people. All right. But now does anyone actually have a question? Keep your hand up if you do. No. Anyone?
So one of the questions that Paul and I talked about beforehand, and it was his first question to me, is how do you define humanistic Judaism? So you have to know that was the thing I thought about the most. And the best definition for me is that humanistic Judaism is my Jewish home, my family, and it's the place where I can say what I believe and believe what I say. And I'm saying it that way because we can all do the intellectual one. You know, it's a denomination in Judaism that supports culture. We can all do that one. But I think what's really moves every one of us individually is, why are we here? So when people ask you what it is, I always start with that personal statement. So
a couple of years ago, we did a marketing process where we came up with actual elevator pitch of what it is, but I still just describe it the way I describe it. But I do start with it's a movement for Jews who either don't believe in God or don't believe in the God of the Bible. I kind of want to make sure that it's broad enough because there is a diversity of beliefs. I think the commonality is we don't believe in the God as written in the Bible. Many of us call ourselves atheists, but many do not. That still benefits from Jewish community and practice and holiday celebrations and life cycle events and Jewish ritual without having to, as you said, without having to say anything that we don't agree with and only saying the things that we do agree with. So I see Eva and then Rick. And you need to unmute. Yep. Hi.
Hi, everyone. Hello, Miriam. Hi. Miriam, do you find that because of the intense training that we got as rabbis, that other rabbis from other movements, once they hear you talk or teach, will come out and say things like, wow, I had no idea that you had such a broad knowledge of all the different forms of Judaism and, so much of Jewish history and culture and so on.
Well, I know that's what you hear because my rabbinate has relied so much on ceremonial work. I've co-officiated with Reform rabbis sometimes, and I've done the major part of the funeral or the wedding, and that's what I get. Oh my goodness. Wow. We didn't know you were good at this, that you knew what you were doing. So yeah, I think that, and that's why so many of us are tied to a serious level of education, and why when we talked about doing a lower level program, where free inquiry, the Center for Inquiry, you can get in an 8-hour day, you can become a ceremonialist. We have 3 classes and some field work, and people can do it in a year. But you can see, because I teach in that program, and you can see they're being enlightened. I don't think you can do Jewish officiation with 8 hours of education. I just don't think you can do it. So that's
one other very quick question. Do you find, and you said about the importance of knowledge, do you find that because of lack of knowledge about Judaism, so many Jewish people are just losing interest in Judaism because they're not so much interested in the ritual, but if they knew more, they would be fascinated?
Well, so, we're at an interesting point. And as I looked at the people coming in, I saw many, many people who I've worked with this year who have become Jewish through the Society for Humanistic Judaism. And when people don't have the ethnic background that you and I have, and that family attachment growing up, the ritual and the traditions and the knowledge have a new level of importance. And so many of the people that come to us and say, we want to be Jewish, and I've already done this, and this, and I'm saying this is looking like my rabbinic education, that I see that the people coming in are probably much better educated in some cases than the people who grew up Jewish.
I'd say it's not more education. I say it's different education. Like, I had more than enough education growing up in the conservative movement to know I want nothing to do with this, right? By age 13. And what I didn't know was elsewhere in the world, sugar and wine was happening. And, that's part of what fires the work that I do, is for those kids who are having a Jewish education right now and are miserable about it because they don't have the opportunity to have the deep conversations about God or the meaning of the universe and so on, because that conversation is threatening to the community that they're in right now. So I think it's not so much about quantity, but what do they get to actually learn about? But it's a great question. Rick, you had a question.
Yeah, thanks, Miriam, so much for taking a second look at the founding myths of Judaism. But I wanted to know about your role after Sherwin's death, the death of a charismatic leader, in reassessing and redefining humanistic Judaism. Of course, you weren't alone in doing that, but you had important thoughts that allowed you to provide some leadership.
Yeah. Well, I was the third person who got the phone call. So I was very much at the beginning. And because the society knew before anybody else, we took the lead in managing what got out there. And we wrote a press release and got it out, and our phone number was on it. This was a Sunday, by the way. And we sat there. There's 3 of us, Bonnie Cousins and Barbara Bloom. And I sat there answering the phones, managing, because when a founder dies, what's the first question? Who's going to replace him? And my answer, even at that time, was nobody can replace Sherwin Wine, but he trained us. We know what to do. And Adam Shalom's rather erudite answer was, who's going to replace him? None of us and all of us. And that's exactly what happened. It took, in fact, I was so well trained that it really took me a couple of years before I said, damn it, Sherwin, why didn't you ever talk to me about this? But I don't know. I always felt that we were equipped to do it, that we would miss that charismatic leadership, absolutely, but that it was also time to make room for a lot of our leaders who are also charismatic leaders. And for those of us from the early days could take our place. And I think that made us a stronger movement. Not that I would ever want to repeat that Sunday morning of 2007. So
yeah, I think that he identified a philosophy and obviously did so much to articulate it, but I think it existed. Like, I mean, I think it's like Einstein didn't invent relativity, right? You know, the thing was happening and he recognized it, and, you know, so he is the first, but it was happening. Like, it was a phenomenon already that people couldn't articulate, and he provided the articulation to it.
Yeah.
And so I think that's why it's able to withstand his losses, because it's true for us, you know, the philosophy, the ideas, and so on, that he articulated it better than anyone, but it's a truth for us. And so that truth continues. And now, you know, the challenge is, how do we articulate it for more people? How do we involve more people? How do we bring, you know, community now? You know, I don't think could have imagined Zoom. I mean, there was internet at that point, but, you know, things have changed dramatically as far as becoming online.
He never used a computer. And he had a flip phone. And in 1988, something really important happened in the movement. We all went to Brussels, and at that conference, we created a statement called "Who is a Jew?" And of all the statements that have been created on all levels of our movement, I think that that is the most significant, because it defines who's in and how few are out. That people who want to be part of the Jewish experience can be part of the Jewish experience by saying so. And when I was watching people come in, I would say a third of the people that are here today were people that I worked with, gave them Hebrew names, sent them a certificate, and they're very much part of the family of the Jewish people.
I put the link to the full statement in the chat because it is remarkable, and it is very different than any of the other movements in Judaism. And at the same time, it is an articulation of what I think most, certainly American Jews, already believe. There have been surveys from 20 years ago now where, you know, they ask people about who is a Jew, and folks would give the kind of traditional answer. And then they asked it in a more personal way of, if your grandchild, you know, only had a Jewish father and not a Jewish mother, and then, like, overwhelmingly, yes, they're Jewish, right? So when they got at it from the personal angle, oh, they're, you know, they were much more aligned with not the traditional responses, but more of our philosophy.
Yeah.
We have time for one more question if anybody is holding back.
Rick, thanks for that question. Nobody's asked me about that for a long time. I always remember how long ago Sherwin died and how old my grandson is, because he was born 3 months after Sherwin died.
Oh, there's a question or comment from Elena in the...
Alana, going forward, do you see that we are creating friendships, conversation, and deep community in our online group? Could this replace the local in-person membership, i.e., we are a worldwide community in the ether?
So I guess the word replace, I'll react to the word replace in the same way when somebody said, who's going to replace Sherwin? I think that what we have to be creative in doing, and, you know, frankly, the pandemic really helped us in this, because before the pandemic, the SHJ itself didn't do any programming except at our conferences, and it gave us a way to do that. So the online has been a way for people who could have never been connected to us or to others to come together. You can't replace that small, intimate group of people who have, you know, celebrated together, who have grieved together, who see each other on a monthly or weekly basis. But I think we've been stronger. We haven't lost our older population who don't drive at night anymore, who still can show up for services online. So I think it's complex, and I'm very thankful to Paul, who always has a new idea of something. He's the idea person now, of something more we can do to connect ourselves to each other. So
I agree. I think it's a both and answer. I think there are great benefits to being part of an in-person community that just can't be replicated online. If you're lucky enough to live near that in-person community, if you're lucky enough to like most of the people in that in-person community, there's benefits and challenges too, because we're humans. So, you're coming together around certain shared commonalities, but then there's plenty of things to disagree about. And I think especially now with what's happening in the world, that our communities, our local in-person communities, are so much better equipped to have difficult conversations on issues where we do not have agreements. Like I talked about, I think a commonality is none of us believe in the God of the Bible, right? Okay, that's shared. But as far as some of the other political issues that are happening in the world, where we have no agreement and maybe barely a majority opinion, it's so much better to have conversations about it in person with people who you're already in community with than to try to do it online, where it is generally a horrible place to try to have intellectual conversation through comments and so on. That said, our Facebook group, which if you're on Facebook and you're not part of the Humanistic Judaism discussion group, please type in the search at Facebook, Humanistic Judaism discussion, join that conversation. I think that has been very helpful for a lot of people who are not part of an in-person community to have the conversations, to ask the questions, mostly and in a non-judgmental way, because it's kind of a walled garden. It's not the Wild West of the internet. It is an opt-in community that is moderated, so you can ask questions there. And there's been some great online conversation there. But I think there's different things we can do online that are much better than would be possible in person, or impossible at all, because we could not have served the folks who are here from Germany, which I'm very excited about, or Mexico City in the same conversation with all of you. So I think we have to do both. I think on the local levels, we need to look at additional models also. Some of the models still work, and in some cases, we need to think about other models, because our kind of Jews don't need a congregational experience every week. And that's the service that other denominations are trying to provide. They're struggling with it too. But our folks in particular aren't necessarily looking for that as the way that they express their community. Sheila.
Hi.
Hi.
I think that this series that you put together is really important. I'm very much in favor of Zoom. I think it's done a lot for people who are spread far and wide. It's brought people together, and during the pandemic especially, it kept us all together. And I think it just helps the movement to reach out to people who would never be able to get to a community. So I think it's a great thing. And thank you, Miriam, for starting this series off. It's lovely to see you.
It's good to see you too.
I have to say on a personal note that Sherwin was with us in Laguna Woods 1 month before he died. And I still remember him when I met him at the airport, and he came down the escalator, and I can see him to this day as he was, and I truly miss him, because when I was at the Birmingham Temple, we were there every Friday night and every Monday for his lectures, and he was fantastic. And it's too bad, Paul, that you never met him. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And that's a great segue for me to encourage folks to come again next month, second Thursday of every month now through the summer. We have a program with another rabbi. Our next rabbi will be Rabbi Jeffrey Chesnol. And I think it'll be interesting and a very different conversation. And it will highlight, as I think this whole series will, the diversity of people that we have doing our rabbinic work, and we have one cantor who will be joining us. So our clerical work in our movement, I think, have so many different approaches and fascinating things to share with us. So that is in a month, and it's the same link, but I will send out reminders. If you're already registered, you don't have to re-register. I'll just send a reminder link for that. But hopefully we'll get more people registered so that more people will attend. But until then, I want to thank Miriam so much. I get to talk to you pretty much every day anyway, but it's really nice to kind of be able to learn more about the history and share it with everybody who is here.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity. It was fun.